So good afternoon, everyone. So thank you once again for coming to the third public lectures. And the title is exciting, and I'm sure you know the Dr. Azfar Hussain is going to talk about the politics and poetics of laughter and jokes, I suppose. And we had plenty of laughter this morning, so we were doing this makeup workshop. And so you can see all our colleagues back there. So the tone has been set, and I'm sure you're going to get the applied version of jokes and laughter. So over to Dr. Azfar Hussain.
But the thing is, yes, right. Thank you, Shamsad. I think jokes are very serious things, light but also serious. So I have an epigraph to my presentation, and it's taken from the Russian philosopher of language, theorist of the novel, theorist of the comic, Bakhtin. So to quote Bakhtin, laughter demolishes fear and piety before an object, before a world, making of it an object of familiar contact and thus clearing the ground for absolutely free investigation of it. Laughter is a vital factor in laying down the prerequisite for fearlessness, without which it would be impossible to approach the world realistically. That was Bakhtin. In 2007, when I was in Dhaka, one of my research projects involved exploring the comic traditions in ancient and medieval Bengali and Sanskrit literatures, as well as certain popular comic traditions in Bangladesh and West Bengal. I ended up writing a piece called Jokes and Laughter, solicited as it was by my friend and comrade Nurul Kabir for the special Eid issue of the New Age, he edits. In that piece, I enthusiastically talked about Gopal Bhar, the jester, my all-time favorite, one whose jokes continue to, I quote, jilt my jaws and tilt my balance with uproarious laughter, unquote, while also theorizing the erotics of laughter and how laughter itself can be the weapon of the oppressed under certain circumstances. But I totally forgot Birbal, the Mughal emperor, Akbar's court jester and trickster, whose funny stories my paternal grandfather used to tell us now and then. So now here is one story. So one morning, Akbar complains to Birbal and says, "Hey, I meet only wise and learned men, but I think some wisdom might be found in folly." There is Akbar. Then Akbar orders, "So show me the 10 greatest fools in the kingdom." Birbal obeys the order. He brings Akbar quite a group of fools. One of them carries a bundle of wood on his head when he rides a horse and thus travels along, for he reasons that the bundle would be too heavy for the horse if he carries it behind him on his saddle. Another fool is a muezzin by profession. He runs daily after his voice to see how far it can go, following his call to prayers. Yet another fool looks for a ring he has lost in the night, not where it is dropped, but in a clearing where the brighter light will make it easier to find. Birbal brings 8 such fools to the king, but Akbar screams, Why 8 only? Didn't I ask you to bring 10 fools?" Now Birbal, the trickster, laughs and responds, "There are actually 10, Your Majesty. We must add you and I, the 2 biggest fools of all, you for giving me such a foolish order, and I for obeying it." So laughter fills the court. As an admirer of Birbal pointed out, Birbal's willingness to make a fool of himself gives Birbal license to make a fool of the king. So here is another story, and this comes from Gopal Bhar. So Gopal Bhar, now I'm on to Gopal Bhar. So what's the difference between seeing and hearing? Gopal asks the king. Gopal Bhar readily replies, just 4 inches. So what is the difference between seeing and hearing? Just 4 inches. Puzzled, the king asks again, what the hell do you mean? Gopal Bhatt fashions his own interpretation. See, what you call seeing has to do with your eyes, while what you call hearing has to do with your ears. Now, you got to measure the distance between your eyes and your ears. Yes, just 4 inches. One probably does not expect or anticipate the kind of answer just 4 inches Gopal Bhatt provides, combining speed with minimalism. Also, one's laughter does not immediately follow his answer, but both our curiosity and our frowns do. In addition, as we see, the answer in question calls for an interpretation in order to morph the apparently weird into the apparently credible. In my reading, Gopal Bhatt's jokes generally involve fiction, even metafiction, which is maybe fiction about fiction within fiction, among other things, interpretation and translation, profoundly interconnected as they all are. Simultaneously a storyteller, a hermeneutician, and even a theorist, Gopal Bhatt, more than a clown or a joker in the negative sense, amply attests to E.M. Foster's famous two-word injunction, only connect. You recall I took up this particular injunction in my first lecture, and we talked about it while talking about, interdisciplinarity, its logics, micrologics and macrologics, and so on and so forth. This is back again. So one might argue that a joke ceases to be joke when it is interpreted. There is an element of truth in this argument. But in Gopal Bhatt's case in particular, jokes come to reside precisely in the kinds of interpretations he offers, making the point that not all interpretations are alike, that not all interpretations are jocular either. And it is Gopal Bhatt whose work also exemplifies that human beings are capable of producing all kinds of jokes: silly jokes, sick jokes, cruel jokes, aggressive jokes, dirty or vulgar jokes, and even serious jokes. Following Gopal Bhatt, then, one might say that philosophers themselves are serious jokers. In response to the 19th century German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche's famous pronouncement that there are no such things as good and evil, but there are only interpretations of them, a theologian asserts, "You must be joking, mister." And notice this, God is dead, declares Nietzsche. Nietzsche is dead, declares God. Indeed, there are jokes that are short, quick, or terse, and there are jokes that are interpretive or even analytical, while there are other jokes that are stories and narratives full of suspense and even reversals of expectation. The Greek philosopher Aristotle, for instance, in his Poetics, places a great deal of premium on what he calls peripeteia, a reversal of expectation, that is, as an attribute of the tragic. While our Gopal Bhatt, suggests that the same reversal of expectation works in the comic as well. Further, Gopal Bhatt's own jokes, numerous and available as they are, in mostly, if not exclusively, folk communities, demonstrate that there are all kinds of tropes and techniques involved in the production and circulation of jokes themselves, a point that Sigmund Freud also makes in his classic theoretical work called Jokes and Their Relation to the Unconscious. Invoking and using Freud, Salvatore Attarotto states in his essay called Linguistic Theories of Humor that there are at least as many as 2,000 techniques which can be deployed to produce jokes. Let's follow then a quick conversation between, within quotation marks, fat American businessman and a, within quotation marks, lanky Mexican economist. The American businessman says, "Looking at you, I understand there is a famine in Mexico now." The Mexican economist responds, "Looking at you, I understand the cause of that famine." Political economy in a minute here. Yes. The rhetoric of insults here? Yes, again. Do we see in that joke a late imperial relationship between Mexico and the US? The kind of relationship that, for instance, the Latin American writer, or Uruguayan writer, Eduardo Galeano, historicizes in his major work called Open Veins of Latin America. Yes, indeed. Now, Mexico's leading political cartoonist, El Fisgon, finds wit in the kind of jokes I have used above. One can also speak of verbal economics vis-a-vis wit as a technique, predicated as it is on the principle that an investment of minimal lexical resources reaps maximal, even windfall, profits in the form of effects. Take this rather well-known philosophical joke, for example. What is mind? No matter. What is body? Never mind. And consider the way in which Charlie Chaplin quips. I quote Chaplin, "Hitler has stolen my mustache." Shakespeare's Polonius has already told us something that is by now a cliché, yet quoted often, that brevity is the soul of wit. And indeed, wit has been taken as an important technique of jokes, although some hold that wit is more than a technique, more than an architectonic principle, more than a branch of rhetoric as such. Wit itself is a relatively autonomous art form, as others argue. In fact, wit has been hospitable, sometimes even vulnerable, to both converging and conflictual definitions. The 18th century British pundit Samuel Johnson, who is also a lexicographer, defines wit in his dictionary as, I quote, "the powers of the mind, the mental faculties, the intellects," unquote. Johnson also reckons wit as the quickness of fancy. There are 7 other definitions in Johnson's dictionary, of course. On the other hand, Webster's dictionary defines wit as, I quote, "the association of ideas in a manner natural but unusual and striking, so as to produce surprise joined with pleasure," unquote. Others define wit as an intellectual form of humor. Whatever wit comes to signify, be it intelligence, presence of mind, sharpness, cleverness, intellectual humor, a play of words and even syllables, the ability to yoke together the sublime and the banal, or the ability to orchestrate a unity of surprise and pleasure, wit no doubt plays an important role in the production of jokes, whose effects and appeal, however, might vary. Wit is also made synonymous with epigrammatic and pithy assertions that make one think and laugh at the same time. You may not always laugh, though. Laughter, more precisely, is the effect of what we call humor, but wit tends to call for at least some exercise of your intellect. Of course, again, there are witty humor and humorous wit. Think of the Irish playwright Bernard Shaw's wit. Here is an example of what is famously called Shavian wit. I quote, "Gambling promises the poor what property performs for the rich, something for nothing," unquote. Another example from Shaw, "The liar's punishment is not in the least that he is not believed, but that he cannot believe anyone," unquote. Yet another, I often quote myself. It adds spice to my conversation. So that was Bernard Shaw. So think then of Bernard Shaw, Gopal Bhatt, Charlie Chaplin, Sukumar Rai, Oscar Wilde and Sigmund Freud attending a round table conference at the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh. There Shaw says, "See, I can make you think and laugh both." Gopal Bhatt asserts, "I interpret, I reveal, I make you see what you cannot, and thus I make you laugh even at yourself." Chaplin characteristically quips, "Hell yeah, I enact what you all think, say, and do. What jokes lie in my acting," unquote. Roy, Sukumar Roy, makes his own point Thus, I show how the nonsensical is not merely nonsensical. It is desirable because it is laughable. Unquote. Wilde characteristically provides a one-liner. Genius is born, not paid. Finally, Freud. I am a Charlie Chaplin with a theoretical cause. Freud, an important theorist of jokes, tells us that not only wit, but also humor and the comic are all differentially involved in the production of jokes themselves. He also suggests that wit, humor, and the comic all constitute both the mechanics and architectonics, both the forms and contents of jokes, although, according to him, those three elements are not identical or similar. There are certain overlaps notwithstanding, suggesting that jokes are like dreams, wet or dry, over which you have no control, and that jokes, like dreams, furnish clues about the unconscious. Freud theorizes how jokes help us overcome what he himself calls mental censors that imposes all sorts of limits and closures on thinking the forbidden. One can apply Freud to the social and can speak of social censors in addition to mental ones, although they implicate and inflect one another in both mental and social spaces produced by and producing human beings themselves. Speaking of Freud, the joke theorist, Marvin Minsky tells us, I quote, for Freud, censors in the mind from powerful unconscious barriers that make it difficult to think forbidden thoughts. But jokes can elude these censors to create the pleasure of unearned release of psychic energy, which is discharged in the form of laughter. He explains, by he means Freud, explains why jokes tend to be compact and condensed with double meanings. This is to fool the childishly simple-minded censors who see only innocent surface meanings and fail to penetrate the disguise of the forbidden wishes, unquote. One can sense that Freud, like Marx, is a depth hermeneutician, among other things, of course, although Freud and Marx work in different areas. To continue with Freud then, Now, if you want to say what you otherwise cannot say, for instance, if you want to say, or if you cannot say that your mayor is an ugly dictator, or that your boss is an asshole who makes you work unnecessarily. Of course, I'm speaking here of both mental and social censors, dialectically interconnected as they are. Then what do? You resort to jokes and release the repressed, while manufacturing meanings that are not unitary or that are relatively indeterminate. In fact, in order to release the repressed, you play what some African American storytellers and theorists call the signifying monkey, a word player who makes meanings slippery, one who is a semantic clown, even an epistemological joker. Instead of putting things straight, a signifying monkey uses innuendo, indirection, irony. In fact, all kinds of tropes, including metaphor, metonymy, synecdoche, and so on. In some ways then, jokes not only signifying practices, but also speech acts in the Austinian sense, do not merely reveal, but also conceal, if not repress. But the question of release is surely important here. Freud indicates that release itself provides pleasure, and jokes come to serve this function, among others, of course. Juxtaposing Freud with Gopal Bhatt, one might then say that joking is like shitting, like defecating. As you know, there are smooth jokes and constipated jokes, constipated ones. And a friend of mine actually came up with an elaborate typology of laughter. And then in that typology, there is this kind of laughter, which is like this, that you don't know how to laugh, or you have the dilemma, Hamletian dilemma, to laugh or not to laugh. Then you decide, you resolve the dilemma. How? You decide, well, you have to laugh, but it got to be damn measured. So then you laugh, so that's kind of constipated laugh. One gets the impression that that person probably is not shitting well. So, but the full release, in fact, is like shitting. But implication actually has come from Freud. And Freud has spoken of the anus and money. the relationship between the two, but that's altogether a different area. But let's take up Freud again. More on Freud's theory of jokes. He theorizes at least two purposes of jokes: aggression and exposure. The first one involves nothing short of hostile jokes, ones that might take the form of satires and even lampoons. Think of some English satirists such as Dryden, Pope, and even Byron, for instance. While the other purposes of jokes, namely exposure, has to do with dirty jokes themselves, although dirty jokes are not merely dirty, but can mobilize an entire battery of innuendos, suggestions, symbols, and other signifying tricks, some of which, for instance, one can see in the 17th century English poet Andrew Marvell's argumentative, even syllogistic poem called To His Coy Mistress. A number of critics, probably Puritan ones, have already asserted that this is the dirtiest poem in the entire history of English poetry. To quote then lines from Marvell's poem: "Thy beauty shall no more be found, nor in thy marble shall sound my echoing song. Then worms shall try that long preserved virginity, and your quaint honor turn to dust, and into ashes all my lust. The grave's a fine and private place, but none, I think, do their embrace. Now therefore, while the youthful hue sits on thy skin like morning dew, and while thy willing soul transpires at every pore with instant fires, now let us sport us while we may, and now, like amorous birds of prey, rather at once our time devour, that languish in a slow chapped power. Let us roll our strength and all our sweetness up into one ball, and tear our pleasures with rough strive through the iron gates of life. Thus, though we cannot make our sun stand still, yet we'll make him run." Andrew Marvell. So someone writes in response to this, has read the poem and writes, that's fantastic as a whole. Someone responds, "You dirty old pig." Well, what's so dirty about that line? Is it a matter of interpretation or reception? One might argue, borrowing from the language of political economy, that jokes, like commodities, have both a use value and an exchange value. What is called, in political economy, by the way, commodity is actually defined as this dialectical unity of use value and exchange value. Use value has to do with the ability to satisfy certain needs. For instance, my shirt has a use value, right? It satisfies a certain need, but it cannot be an exchange value unless and until it enters the market. It gets sold and bought, or bought and sold, and buying and selling are logically connected. You cannot buy something if it is not sold. So when it's sold, it becomes a commodity. So jokes, what is called, jokes like commodities can have both a use value and exchange value in a different sense though. What is called use value, as I've already pointed out, has to do with the ability to satisfy certain needs. Jokes do satisfy our needs: biological, linguistic, even aesthetic, sexual, political. On the other hand, exchange value for commodities has to do with buying and selling, as I already pointed out. Of course, it is common knowledge that there is no selling without buying and vice versa. In the case of jokes then, there is no production of them without their reception and vice versa. A joke ceases to be a joke if it is not received by someone in ways in which she or he can respond to the generally, if not exclusively, intended effect of laughter. Although jokes, dirty jokes for example, do not merely induce laughter, but also invite, provoke, and prompt various emotions on various registers, ranging from disgust to anger, and reactions like face cringing and angry retorts, as a critic, I think, rightly put it. So, as was already indicated, jokes serve many functions, range freely within the broad zodiac of discourses, use an entire range of tricks and techniques, and produce a variety of effects. Still, one might relatively safely say that the production of jokes primarily, if not exclusively, aims at the production of laughter. But why do people laugh? There is in Germany, rather Austria, a tradition of theorizing laughter from Kant to Freud himself. In his critique of judgment, the late 18th century German philosopher Immanuel Kant tells us that, I quote, laughter is an effect that arises if a tense expectation is transformed into nothing, unquote. Notice what more Kant has to say on the subject, and I quote again, an Englishman at an Indian stable in Surat saw a bottle of ale being opened, and all the beer turned to froth, rushed out. The Indian, by repeated exclamation, showed his great amazement. Well, what's so amazing in that? Asked the Englishman. Oh, but I'm not amazed at it coming out, replied the Indian, but how you managed to get it all in, unquote. This makes us laugh, at least this has made me laugh, and this has made Kaiser sir has laugh, I can see that, but laughter is still not widespread. So, but it gives a hearty pleasure to some, of course. This is not because, say, we think we are smarter than this ignorant man, nor are we laughing at anything else here, that it is our liking and what we noticed through our understanding. It is rather that we had a tense expectation that suddenly vanished. Well, I've already taken up Freud quite a bit. His basic points, however, can be quickly rehearsed here. Well, we need to release the repressed in the form of laughter. In fact, according to Freud, we laugh because the psychic energy moves from the unconscious to the conscious in unexpected manners, mediated as they are by certain techniques deployed at a given point. Laughter, a mode of expression as it is, has to do with the surplus of that energy. Freud has been contested by many, I know, but his point concerning the relationships among laughter, release, and jokes has been taken up by a number of joke theorists today. It is interesting then that a French writer makes fun of Germans themselves, saying that the title of the world's shortest book, what can be the title of the world's shortest book? The world's shortest book. So, French writer talking about German. The world's shortest book is 100 Years of German Humor. Of course, there are numerous jokes that reveal hostilities and conflicts between nations, classes, ethnic communities, religious sects, professions, and collectivities. There are all kinds of classist, racist, patriarchal, nationally chauvinist, and even fascist jokes in the world. Those jokes themselves turn out to be the sites of class, race, gender struggles in many instances, while jokes are ideological productions as well. Also, jokes serve as the weapons of the weak and as the weapons of the powerful both. In other words, jokes can both be subversive and complicit. Given all this, then, it is obvious that jokes are political in more senses than one. But in order to account for or to demystify the politics of jokes, it is always important to raise such questions as whose jokes? What kinds of jokes are they? And what probable effects do they produce? Now, in order to see how politics works, let me turn to what the Marxist theorist and humorist Bertel Ollman, the inventor of the famous class struggle game for children, like you have this Monopoly game for children. So Bertel Ollman is a comrade of mine, actually. He teaches politics at New York University. Actually, he divides his time between NYU and Oxford. And his sense of it is extraordinary. Extraordinary. He's a Marxist. Marx himself was a great humorist, you know. Although there are many Marxists who don't want to laugh, their idea is that they should not laugh. They should not laugh. They will laugh when the revolution succeeds. Until the revolution, they will not laugh. So there are those Marxists. But Bertel Ollman this sense of humor is great. So he invented this class struggle game in response to this Monopoly game. In fact, in a kind of political response to that game. Monopoly game, that teaches you how to be a capitalist, a good one probably. Monopoly capitalism. So the class struggle game, it aims at enabling children to see how exploitation works, and then enables them to protest this, you know. It's resistance game. We speak of resistance literature. It's resistance game for children, class struggle. So he has what he himself calls radical jokes. So one of his radical jokes is this question: how many capitalists does it take to screw in a light bulb? Answer: none. Since we don't need capitalists to screw in light bulbs or anything else that really needs doing in our society. Mark how Ullman points to the struggle between those who do things, laborers, and those who reap profits because of what those laborers do. Another radical joke from Berthold Ullman. Student asks his principal, where is my teacher? Citywide layoffs, stupid, replies the principal. My textbooks, asks the student. State austerity plan, stupid, says the principal. Student aid or scholarship, continues the student. Federal budget cuts, stupid, says the principal. Finally, exasperated, the student asks, but how am I going to get an education? To which the equally exasperated principal replies, this is your education. So poems can be jokes, and jokes poems. The Chilean poet Nicanor Parra, noted as he is for what he calls emergency poems, mobilizes a poem as a joke and a joke as a poem. I'm going to share this poem with you. It's called Warnings. No prying allowed. No sneezing, no spitting, eulogizing, kneeling, worshipping, howling, no sleeping permitted in this precinct, no inoculating, talking, excommunicating, no harmonizing, escaping, catching, running is absolutely forbidden, no smoking, no fucking. Indeed, when there are repressions and censorships, mental or social, jokes arise. But this is not to suggest that jokes do not exist or thrive or flourish under a democracy, for instance. Under democracy, jokes follow different itineraries and routes that invested with different creative or tropological energies. But at this point, we need jokes that are nothing short of liberating, jokes that make us think, question, and act, and jokes that make fun of all anti-democratic and anti-people forces and practices. Indeed, we need jokes as weapons of the weak. We need jokes in our struggles against all forms and forces of oppression and exploitation. I'll stop here.